All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our December 5th edition of the Let's See Freeman Booking Live show. Today I'm here with two guests that I've been privileged to know for some years, originally from Illinois and California, but now coming to us from Berlin, Germany, and from Virginia. Rachel can remind me exactly where in Virginia she is. I'm really happy to have you both with me. This is the last show of 2021. It's a very important topic. We're talking about grieving the loss of a parent. Rachel, would you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us why this topic matters to you?
So my name is Rachel Tenpenny, and I'm also known as the Grief Gal. I have a website called thegriefgal.com where I help people heal from grief and loss. And so that is, I created a special program actually to help walk people through their pain and through their loss in a way that actually can restore healing and thriving to their life instead of getting stuck in just coping and surviving. But my plan is also very holistic. So I also look at a lot of very practical, tangible ways to support yourself through grief and loss. And I started doing this because I experienced a devastating loss in my life. And it became very clear to me very early on in my grief that we have a very confused society that does not know what to do with grieving people. And I promised myself that when I got healed, when I did my own work on my own heart after my loss, that I would teach other people everything that I learned so that grieving people were no longer just sort of sent out to navigate their journey all by themselves, that we can come alongside them, support them, and actually guide them towards healing. One of my pet peeves is when I hear people say grief is forever or you never stop grieving. I don't believe that for 1 second. I think missing and longing and having questions, feeling an emptiness around not having our loved one in our life anymore, I believe that's permanent. But I think that's permanent because we're human beings and we still have feelings, like we're feeling humans. And so we will always have feelings around the person or the thing that we lost, but we will not necessarily have a permanent grief experience because grieving is different than having feelings. And I think it's important to discuss how and why and what that really means. But I take a very firm stance on this whole idea that grief is forever. I think when we tell people that, we take away their hope and we take away their power, because what we're basically telling them is that the circumstances in your life are more powerful than you are in your response to them. And I don't like any message that tells people that they don't have any power over their own heart. There's plenty that we don't have control over. And so I'm not saying that we have power over everything because we don't, but there's a couple things we always have power over. And one of those things is our ability to choose, our attitude, our the direction that we'll make, we want our heart to go. Nobody can take that away from us.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here with us today? And why do you choose to be here? Thank you for being here with us. I know this is not an easy time or an easy day for you.
Sure. I'm Steph. I currently live in Berlin, Germany. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I lived in Los Angeles for a while, which is where I met Betsy. I last year was teaching English in Vienna, Austria, and studying opera, which was why I chose to go to Vienna. And when the pandemic hit, I went back home to Denver, where my family made the decision to start hospice for my mom, who had osteosarcoma. And then we accompanied her to her death at home in June of 2020. So in the middle of a pandemic, it was like grief wrapped in grief. It was like a grief croissant. And to do the pandemic and to not have any of the things available, like seeing friends, going to a restaurant, getting a beer, doing anything. It was just be at home in grief. And so we had to do the whole process of that during the pandemic. And then I went back to Vienna and then proceeded to be alone in a tiny apartment in a foreign country for 7 months in a complete lockdown, where I did most of my grieving. And then from that, I drew a lot of things. I started a blog, which came out of Instagram posts where I just like talk about everything I was feeling. And then I was like, I don't need to be doing this on Instagram. I can formalize this more. So it became a blog. I started a breathing practice called soul singing. Breathing is healing. And using opera breathing technique to release stress, to move through a fight, flight, or freeze cycle, and sort of became a connoisseur of resources, looking for things that were helpful. And I'm an external processor. I was a high school teacher. I do stand-up comedy regularly here, and so I'm very much like telling the story is the thing that helps me heal. While also just being constantly angry all the time. Like a couple, like last weekend I woke up and it was like my mom had died yesterday, and I was like, well, not getting out of bed today. So I am always trying to learn more how to actually care for myself, and what is true self-care, what is true, how do I contextualize this where it gets the honor and the importance that it deserves, because I still feel like I'm either completely in it or absolutely numb. It's like there's no contextualization that is sort of functional. And I think that that's part of the journey, is figuring out how do I deal with the overwhelming days, and how do I talk about my mom without losing it. So that's me.
Yeah, Steph and I were we just recently discovered that my father and her mother were born on the exact same day, month and year, which is actually an odd day in history too, it's the day that President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. And it's right around Thanksgiving too, which I always
my mom was born in she was born in 1951, so it was Thanksgiving.
Correct. That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, and it doesn't always land on Thanksgiving, but sometimes it does, of course.
Yep.
So that adds another really interesting layer to all the grief, and makes it even more. We're only like 2 weeks away from that day. Okay, I said I was going to speak as little as possible, and I really mean it. So
we like when you talk, Betsy. One of the things I was more curious about what you were talking about, because I thought you said some really insightful things about your grief process, and I wanted to ask you a little bit more about how knowing yourself, like understanding who you are, how you are, like you mentioned, you're an external processor. You mentioned, certain, we were, even before we got live, we were talking about like nature walking and taking pictures and, photography and all these things. And how has knowing yourself been beneficial to, surviving your grief process? And what other things have you learned about yourself as a result of your grief process?
My gosh, just like nice, easy, casual dinner questions, Oh my
Let's
God.
Just dive right in. Why not?
Yeah. I do think that knowing myself has been essential, but it's not so much like the knowing it as it is the acknowledging when a need arises. And like, I know I am an external processor. That's been well documented since high school by everyone who's ever met me. But the knowing that like, okay, this has come up, like I need to call my dad right now. Like I need to talk about this right now. Like we need to have a group cry on Facebook right now because that's what's going on. And like, the thing is buzzing inside and so like, I think it's not so much an intellectual knowing as it is like when the movements happen, it's like, okay, this is a thing that needs to be fed. Or if I wake up and I'm like having an awful morning, my default is to say like, come on, it's so American, like you gotta get out of bed and make a day of it. Like the idea of productivity at all costs. And then to say like, no, it's okay. I'm going to do nothing today. Like I am going to intentionally procrastinate a project just a little bit more because my grief needs space today. And what I need is to go on a run and to do yoga and to do nothing on my computer. And so like that sort of like the knowing of myself is a lot, in a lot of ways, being able to know what myself needs. And so it's like, if I need to go on a run, then I'm going on a run. That's priority. If I need to go buy Ben and Jerry's and a bunch of bread, like that is what will happen this evening. Like, and I'm not going to sit there and like berating myself for like doing the sort of like the I'm on my period, I need to eat ice cream thing. It's like, well, this counts as that. We're doing it right now. Yeah. And just sort of that, like being able to give space to the thing, and you know, and that's sort of after a year, or not a year, a lifetime of being sort of following the movements of what am I desiring right now, whether it was a vocation, whether it was knowledge within a romantic relationship, whether it was dealing with a like career and choices. It's sort of like what is really going on, what am I actually thinking about this? And that was something that, you know, it's sort of like I have trained myself to do by having lots of really great mentors and like going to have great communities. You know, it's like you learn how to be in community by being in community. And I was always taught to like be honest with myself and be present with my people. And so now we add this element of there's like this thing flying through me and I have no idea what it's going to hit and I have no idea where it's going to go, but I still have to like be honest with myself and be honest with my people about like this like new pinball ball of grief that is going through, and I don't know what it's going to hit today. I don't know if I'm going to feel it at all. I don't know what it's going to throw off. But it sort of comes from like being taught from a young age with the communities that I was in, is like whatever you are feeling is good and you have to make space for it. And it's just like dealing with this unknown, which is like a terribly depressing and overwhelming sense of ultimate despair in which the world will never be the same and all that is good in the world has exited with the most wonderful woman in the world. You know, it's like yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I walk through my clients, and one of the very first things that I teach my clients is that feelings are not right or wrong, good or bad. Feelings are clues that help us tune in to what is really going on so that we can figure out what we really need. Because oftentimes what people will do is they will stop at just identifying their feeling, right? I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm overwhelmed, I feel abandoned, I'm misunderstood, you know what, they hit on a feeling. And they might even go as far as confessing that feeling, telling somebody, putting it out there, right? I feel fill in the blank. And then that's where it will end. And I always encourage them to go, you can't stop there, okay? Now it's time to uncover, well, if this is my feeling, what is that feeling telling me about what I need? Because when I figure out what I need, then I can take the best step forward to get that need met, right? Like you were saying, some days I wake up and I say, I need yoga, right? And no computer. Like that's what I need. The need is how we start healing. The feeling just clues us in to the need, right? And we live, unfortunately, in a culture right now that is so wrapped up in their ability to just be honest about their feelings, to let themselves feel their feelings, that they're missing the fact that they're stopping at the first half, and they're missing the benefit of feeling your feelings, which is to understand what you need and then be able to act on that. Because that's what, you know, grief has a way of almost paralyzing us. Like you said, it's that like constant, it's 1 minute you're stuck and the next minute you're kind of, you don't know what's going on, right? And it's figuring out what we need and making those choices to meet those needs that take us through our pain in those tiny little baby steps. When we don't really know what we need, we only know what we're feeling, and it's just despair and overwhelm and depression and anger and confusion. That's when we get stuck, right? And we're just like, our feelings become stronger than us. When if we actually figure out what we need, we become stronger than our feelings.
Can I, break in, just ask a question that I really like what you both brought up just a little bit is how have you chosen, what has worked for both of you, Steph and then Rachel, as far as choosing who those closest people are that you really can talk to, who do a good job of pulling out not just your emotions, because that can be dangerous, like Rachel said, not just finding out how you're feeling so they could try to fix you or rush you into feeling better, which is not going to happen right away, but who are willing to sit with you. What have you found works? How do you know who you could really trust to feel safe with in your grief? Steph?
Yeah. Well, the first one obviously is my dad, my brother. because they like for the 2 months, 3 months leading up to my mom's death, it was like me and my dad, like one holding, one wiping, like helping my mom to the commode, to the bed, in the wheelchair. It's like my brother and my dad and I are like counting all the pills and like taking turns sleeping next to her to like help her in the middle of the night. So it's like there was a visceral physical closeness to her passing that is only shared by those other two people. And my brother was with her, holding her when she died. And so that's like they will have an insight into the reality of this that is all encompassing in a way that no one else, my husband will never, future husband, if you're out there, let me know. And my like, like if I try to explain it to my children, it's like no one will understand that my mom's death and my mom's like the beauty of her body, the way that my dad and my brother did. And so because of that, they're always my first line. They're the people who I call when I need to talk, or when I just need to be able to feel safe without having to do any sort of performative grief, because performative grief is a real thing and it's not necessarily demanded of others. It's like I demand it of myself in order to make others feel more comfortable, like they're actually helping me, because I want them to feel good about it, when it's like, no, like I'm pretending to be sad and then feel better based on the thing that they said so that they feel like they said something nice, when in fact I don't even want to be having this conversation. And that mostly happened early on. It's like I don't really find myself in that situation anymore, but like I never have to perform in front of my dad or my brother ever. Not that I ever did, but it's just like now with this thing, and I can say things and they just get it, which is what you ultimately want, right? You just want to be able to like, sniff, like, and then they're like, I know exactly what you're feeling. And you're like, thank you. That's what I needed. But then like sort of outside of that, I had this group of friends from high school who all happened to be able to make it to Colorado for the funeral. And they really showed up for me, and like, they haven't lost a parent, but like they have strained relationships or divorce, or, different things happen. So it's like they have a little bit of the context, and they were very close to the event. And so I feel like I have an openness with them just because they were there in the immediate aftermath. In many ways. And then like I have another dear friend who I used to teach with, and he just lost his father, and I was able to make it to the funeral in Palm Springs to support him. And it just becomes this like, and I know, and so we get it. And like we're on the phone the other day, and this is the guy who does not cry. He like jokes that he has one feeling, and like on the phone, like he started tearing up, and I was like, oh my God, your poor one feeling, oh my God, like, are you okay? It's like, so we were talking about his dad, and I knew the reason he felt safe doing that is because he knows I went through it. Like he knows, like, I got it. And that, I met a girl here in Berlin, and we're talking, and we're getting coffee, and like I mentioned my mom died, and she was like, oh, my mom died too. And it was immediately like, oh, you're on the team. You're on the team. I don't have to explain this shit to you. Like, this is great. And so I think it's sort of like I've cultivated throughout my life great communities, but then also now there's this sort of new thing where it's like, oh, you also have like the mark of a lost parent, like, oh, you're, it's like, okay, I see that, like we share this horrible thing. And it's interesting, like in like ways that it'll just like, either I have to work really hard to not be emotional and to be exactly what someone expects of a stereotype of someone who lost their parent, or I feel totally comfortable because they get it and I don't have to do any work, because they also understand that it's just a messy shit show all of the time. So that's sort of like how I navigate, who do I talk about this with? And there are some of my best friends who I just don't bring it up with, because I know they're going to try their darndest to be there for me. But because they have not gone through it, they're not going to have the tools that I need. And I know that it's just going to become this like thing where they just want to hug me so hard into wellness. And I know that they will not have the tools to do it. And so I don't bring it up. And it's really hard because, it's like so many people that I love so much have not lost a parent. And like, part of me is like, well, I hate you. Like, but the other part is like, I wish I could take this to you, but I know that it's not going to be, you're not going to feel satisfied and I'm not going to feel satisfied. So there are other things that I will take to you, but this is going to go into particular spaces.
Yeah, I know it gets heavy. you know, searching for that community of like who gets me, right? Who, you know, especially when, even when we have quote similar losses, there's still so many different variants, right, within even that similarity. And one thing that I learned, you know, because it's been almost, you know, over 13 years since my serious loss, and one of the things that I've learned is that some people have an amazing capacity to just simply care deeply about their friend or their family member who's grieving, and some people don't. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a bad person. It just means that there's lacking skills, or it's too triggering for them, and there's just issues in the way. And that as I started progressing through my healing process, I started pulling in more and more of those people who were just had that capacity for empathy and compassion, even if they didn't have a similar loss, and put a little bit of healthy, safe distance between the people who just couldn't. Because I even found that people who had a similar loss to mine sometimes didn't always have the capacity to care about somebody else's loss. They were too busy caring about their own. And that goes, I mean, and sometimes that just has to be the phase that they're in, like different, you know, everyone's, so it's, I'm not saying that from a place of judgment. I'm just saying, you know, I turned to, like, you know, my family, mostly because they knew me so well and I knew them. Like, I just knew I could trust them, even though they had a loss not similar to mine. And then I did have this one girlfriend who I barely knew, to be honest, at the time. And she sort of just showed up in my life and was this amazing, like you said, like she didn't put that pressure on me to like, I just want to help you feel better as soon as possible kind of pressure. She just was like present. And I loved it. And I, even for us not having a huge, you know, established background yet, right? And so whenever, like, for example, when I tell my clients, you know, I always tell them, first of all, to be very careful about who they let in, right, to their grief process, but also not to be so quick to shut everyone out either, because people can surprise you. And it is a fluid thing, and it's okay if a relationship was working for a while and then it's not, and you can say, you know, during the season of grief, right, I need some space, or I need some distance. Like I hear this a lot with like in your situation, like your siblings seem to be right on page with you, but sometimes that's not the case. Like siblings will have very different experiences and they don't align. And then there's hurt feelings because they think, well, you're the one person who should understand what I'm going through, but yet you don't really seem to understand, like understand the same way, or experience it the same way that I am. And so, you know, we actually have a workshop of this in my program specifically to walk people through what happens when the people that you think are going to get it the most don't. And what happens when the people who you think would get it the least are the ones that show up for you the best. And how to, you know, walk through that, because we don't, you know, I often see this with husbands and wives, you know, they're like, you know, he should be the one person who knows me the most, right, is there for me the most, and they're just not, because they either don't get it, or they just don't have the capacity, or it's too grief triggering, or they go into their own coping mechanisms, right? And so sometimes it can be incredibly powerful to have someone in our life who, like you said, you're just like the mark of a person who's lost a parent, you know, the mark of loss, we just recognize that tattoo, we're like, oh, I've got that same tattoo. But also it can be unbelievably heartbreaking to have that expectation and then it's not there. And we have to be careful that we don't convince ourselves that healing can't take place unless we have that. Now, it absolutely makes grief an easier burden to carry when we have people walking with us, understanding us, not rushing us. But it is not actually a requirement, though. Healing can come even if you and your loss are not perfectly understood. You know, and that's why I think in our grieving process, we have different relationships at different times that we pull in different ways, because we have a lot of needs and our needs change through our grieving process. Yeah, it can get a little bit dicey, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what's the hardest, is that what we talked about a little bit before we went live was, I can't remember, I think it was Rachel that mentioned the fight or flight response. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot.
With
is like
death.
when Was it Steph? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, fight or flight. The adrenaline, like we've been talking a lot about, boundary setting and chemicals like neurochemistry. Like we've learned about that a lot in our culture in the past, 10 years. I mean, much more than we were, I think, in the decades before that. And it's fascinating. But if we leave the conversation there, like Rachel is saying, and we don't process it properly with the right people, it can really be dangerous, because when you start to put up boundaries and harm relationships, in my case, you harm relationships with your own, in my case, your own inner judgments and criticisms of the people who really love you the most, but that are just processing the same grief in a different way, or have other griefs or stressors that they're also are responsibilities that they have to carry. And they may be introverts while you're an extrovert, or they're an extrovert while you're an introvert, and then it becomes a big mess that could take years and years to figure out later. Which, that's okay. It's okay that we're going to make mistakes, we're going to mess it up, we're not going to be perfect. And that's, I think, the hardest thing, is that if you are the kind of person that always got an A, you cannot get an A in this. And that's, I think, for me, having that grace for myself is saying, yes, I snapped at somebody today, but that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. I just snapped at somebody.
Yeah, well, before we started live, Steph and I were talking about how there really is no way to be ready for grief, right? So even if you've had time, to prepare, or you knew that it was coming, or you read a couple of books, and not that those things are unhelpful. It is always helpful to get information and to start examining, right, what's coming. But there's never going to be enough information or enough time or enough support to be ready and go, oh, I'm so glad I got to this place because I was ready. You're never ready. It's always hard. It never goes the way you want. It lasts longer than you want it to. It's more confusing than you anticipate it to be. That other people in your life also handle, cope, and respond to it very differently. Because the core root of why loss causes grief is because of the level of relationship we have with that person. And because relationships are going to be different, right? Siblings, your sister or your brother is going to have a different relationship with your mom than you did. Then that grief is going to impact us in different ways. Not that we're not all impacted by grief, but grief has an effect on us that differs based on the differences in our relationships. One of the things I work with a lot of actually is my clients come to me and say, I've lost a parent, but that parent I didn't have a good relationship with, right? A parent that I had a tough, a parent that abused me, or a parent that was a narcissist, or a parent that was hard on me, or a parent that I didn't like very much, right? What do I do with that? We actually call it like experiencing the grief of losing a not so loved one, because not all relationships are beautiful and good, actually, but they can still cause grief, because we grieve not only the relationship that we lost, but we also grieve when we realize something we've always wanted we're never going to get, right? We see a lot of that grief in like infertility, or terminal diagnosis, or things like that. And so part of, quote, being ready for grief is this acceptance that we'll never be ready, and we're going to have to learn, be patient with ourselves, ask for help when we need it, be willing to adapt, right? I thought what Steph was saying about like the breathing exercises she was talking about, and changing this mentality, like that American mentality of productivity at all costs, right? Like we have to sort of shut down those things and go, this is not any longer, right, how I want to move myself through life, because I've realized that there's more to life than productivity. Because we can return to being productive, most people do it, but we're dying inside a little bit every single day, right? And I think deep grief has a way of taking us all the way to the bottom. We bottom out, and it's an opportunity where we have to decide which direction we're going to go, and if we're going to reprioritize, right? It's sort of, I always help, because people ask me all the time, was grief part of the reason why, because I went through a divorce, so I lost my marriage. Was grief part of the reason why you lost your marriage? And I say, no, it wasn't. All grief did not create any new problems or issues, but the grief absolutely exposed the ones that our other coping skills had sort of been able to hide. And so grief like strips away those coping, right, that false coping and like that, and you're just sort of left there going, okay, I have to make real choices here. I have to make real decisions because I no longer have the ability to kind of keep bullshitting my way through. I'm sorry. We're probably not allowed to swear. Sorry.
It's, I do not have a no swearing rule.
I already did it.
Yeah. You know,
I can't, sometimes you just need to swear. It's all right. We're all adults.
Right. Well, and I think what's interesting is, and I think both of you can probably agree, you know, I don't, you know, Steph, I don't know you very well, but I know Betsy. And so I imagine if she's your friend, you probably align with this. Like, I was not really a bullshitter anyway. Like, I already lived a pretty authentic life. My goal in life was not a facade and to be fake and like, you know, to hold together my life with these invisible strings, right? And so I think that was one of the things that was hardest for me during my season of grief, is as an already honest, authentic kind of raw, you know, I share my heart with everybody pretty much as part of my personality, part of my existence. And then to heap grief on top of that, it was exhausting for me because I didn't know how much more like raw and authentic and how many more values and, you know, convictions and things I needed to change or switch because I was already there. If anything, that's what made me the most angry, because I felt like this was an unfair expectation of any human being.
Yes. Well, and I really want to say that actually has been one of the hardest things that I feel like God has taught me in my life, is that, okay, that sufficiency, all sufficiency, we want to be all sufficient. We are taught to be self-sufficient and not be needy in America, but that is not how we were really created. We're not intended to be people without needs. We were supposed to need each other from the very beginning. So and what's funny is that socially, one of my biggest problems in life, or my perceived problems, was that you know, I would ask for help and people would think I was too needy, when actually it was already a huge effort for me to even have to ask in the first place. Huge effort to have to ask, but I knew that I couldn't do something on my own. You know, no, I cannot move a whole apartment of furniture right now by myself. No, I can't pay for this by myself. No, I can't make my own meal right now because I'm exhausted. No, I can't get out of bed today. And then that was a lesson I learned pretty early on in life. And a lot of people never learn it because for some reason they're always able to get out of bed. They never ever suffer to that level, it seems. And I don't know why that is. And it's great. I mean, I think it's great for them, but I wasn't created that way. So I don't intend to ever get to the point again, if I can help it, where I cannot get out of bed. But if you can't get out of bed, you can't get out of bed. And we got to have grace for each other in that. I mean, ice cream is a meal sometimes in my life, but more importantly, in the lives of some of the elderly people in my life. And we are all okay with that. If all you could eat is ice cream, please eat ice cream. We want you to eat. That's way more important than lecturing you on what vitamins you need right now, you know, or if all you could do is drink some broth, just drink some broth. So yes, I forgot whose turn it is to talk. Jump in any.
Yeah, I feel like there's like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs when like grief comes in, where it's like step one, like I need to sleep, like go away, like I must be alone in my bed, and like or like rest, like I have to be alone and quiet and like in, you know, and then like okay, I need to hydrate, like, and I need to eat some food, but it needs to be any food. And like, then, okay, like maybe then I move my body, like then maybe I feel safe enough, you know, I don't know, Rachel, you probably have way more science behind this, but like, I would like, there's
you're sharing, yes, you're sharing lots of wisdom completely. Like, you know, I have maybe more, you know, more PowerPoint presentations on it, but like everything you're saying is exactly spot on.
Yeah. Like the notion of like the patient, like self-patience. And then, you know, as I get comfortable, like, okay, I can't get out of bed today, I'm going to eat. Okay. Like I've, I ate a loaf of bread for 2 days. So now I'm going to actually go out and buy a bunch of fruits and vegetables and like make myself a really good like soup full of like these delicious vegetables that I'm going to like slow cook. But it's like, oh, I needed to first get out of bed. And then, it's like, I'm not going to go from zero to like making myself a complicated, delicious meal. Like, oh, no, no, no. We're going to have 72 hours of slow growth in between those two things, like through which my grief just has to like ebb and flow before we get to the delicious and nutritious meal,
Right,
and that
absolutely.
like the patience, the self-patience is what I've had, for all the confidence and self-knowledge I have, being patient with myself is the hardest thing, because I'm angry and then I'm angry for being angry, because it's like, this is not going to go anywhere. This is not going to do anything. Like nothing will be accomplished by this. And if, it's like, if we can't use it, why is it here? Like, and so that gets,
Yeah,
it's
well,
like, for me,
I'd like to talk
yeah.
about anger though for a second, because I think anger gets a really bad rap, especially in the grief community. Anger, first of all, anger is a secondary emotion. So there's always something underneath anger. So it's really important to go, okay, where's my anger stemming from? What's sort of the foundation of my anger? But anger is an incredibly beneficial emotion, because anger, first of all, anger keeps us safe. Okay. Anger is one of those things that tells us, what's dangerous, right? Or what's risky. But also more importantly, anger points towards injustice. Okay. Like things that are wrong. And when there is wrong in the world and we are angry about it, that's telling us that we are healthy human beings. Because if what's wrong with the world doesn't make us angry, then we're broken. Okay, something is off in us. And
like
so
that line, I like, if what's wrong with the world doesn't make us angry or broken. That's a very good line.
So, and then that's where that self-grace comes in, to give ourselves permission to say, there's nothing wrong with being angry. And actually, angry is incredibly beneficial emotion at this time, because it's alerting me to the things that are wrong, that are bad, that are dangerous, that are violent, that are unjust, that are unfair, right? And that kind of acknowledgement of our emotions and our feelings helps move us towards, like I was saying before, the next best action step, right? Because and again, it's because we have so many myths and misunderstandings about our feelings, where we're at, we're told that, anger is wrong, right? Or anger is bad, or what good comes out of anger? Well, I've got news for you. Actually, a ton of good. Okay. We have entire revolutions fought. Women got the right to vote, right? Like worlds and nations and humans and cultures have changed because somebody got angry enough to finally do something, right? It's when we point our anger towards ourselves, right? Or we point our anger aimlessly because we don't understand what's driving it. That's when anger gets dangerous. But every emotion gets dangerous when we do that. Not just anger, right? When we're sad, when we're confused, when we're disconnected, if we have nowhere to point that emotion and it becomes aimless, it does devastating things to our lives. When we know where to point it, we understand where it's coming from, and we know what we need, it benefits our lives. And I just think people need to be reminded a lot more that your anger there's nothing wrong with you, right? Your anger is not bad or wrong or unjustified. It's actually just a really important part of being on, like you were talking about before, that authenticity, that ability to just say, this is where I'm at and this is where I need to be for a little while. And then the other point that I wanted to add on is, part of the grieving process is there is this phase. I actually have divided it into 6 phases, and I won't go into all 6 right now. But the beginning phase is actually what I call the survival phase. And again, with so many myths and misunderstandings around grief, there's so much pressure to get out of that survival phase as soon as possible, because by God, why would we only want to limit our lives to surviving when we could be thriving? Well, I've got news for you. When you're in deep grief, there is a season of just surviving. And it is exactly what you described. Like, I just need to sleep, right? I just need like a roof over my head and quiet, and I just need to sleep. And that's why it's so important when other people are grieving that we make sure they have their basic needs met, so they even have the capacity to even start surviving. Because when they say they can't even pay their bills, right? If a spouse dies who's the breadwinner and they don't even have money coming in, like how detrimental it is when they have to set their grief aside in order to pay bills or take care of children, or, I mean, if people do what they have to do, but the more support we can give them in that moment, the more they can actually start moving through grief into their healing process, because that level of survival keeps you stuck. But here's the thing. So as we're in that survival phase, right? Like maybe it does for 72 hours, we only eat bread and we don't actually have a vegetable. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's okay because it's the best you can do. Or maybe we haven't exercised in a long time and, you know, maybe our priority is no longer how we look in our yoga pants. Totally okay, right? Like this is the survival phase. What we just want to be mindful of is giving ourselves permission to be in that survival phase without this constant judgment of like, but I'm just surviving, I'm not thriving, I'm just surviving, I'm not thriving. Like, I know you're just surviving. It's okay. It's worth just surviving. But also, when it's okay to give ourselves permission, though, to start moving more towards that reviving that heads us towards thriving. And we don't, because surviving is great. Surviving is what we need. Surviving is essential until it's not. And that moment for each person is a little bit different, where they wake up and go, you know what, I think I'm ready for a little less surviving and a little bit more reviving. And they take that first next step. But you can't get to that acknowledgement. You don't have that sort of epiphany moment where like, okay, I'm ready to go to the next phase, unless you've really given yourself permission to be in the first phase. Just say, like, it reminds me of when my son was born. You know, I had a baby, and, you know, I was a nursing mama. I had a baby. At the time, my husband was deployed. He was my first one. And, you know, I could barely like get a shower. I think I only ate like foods I could feed myself in one hand, like because I would be like baby on a boob with like a bagel or, you know, something. He never slept, which is one of the big things when he was a baby. And like I was in survival mode, like just survival mode. And one of the best things I ever did was just give myself permission to be there and not be like, oh, you're a bad mom, or what's wrong with your baby, or why isn't anyone helping me? And just like go into survival. But then after about 4 months, he started changing, I started changing, like things started changing. And I was like, I don't need to be so in survival. And I know that's a motherhood story, but believe it or not, I drew on that hardcore when I was going through grief, going, there are seasons of life where the best we can do is survival, and that's okay. And then when the best we can do is more than survival, let's do that too, right? But we don't have to constantly fight ourselves every nanosecond about what we're not doing right about a situation that has no right or wrong. It just,
No hard feelings.
Yeah, well, and that's it, the pushing ourselves kind of thing, whether it came from, you know, a sport or a parent or a teacher or a, you know, something that we internalized, that inner person that says, suck it up and do it anyway. Sometimes that is actually really healthy, I think for me, but sometimes it's not. And that is a very personal decision. And the best friends and roommates and you know, the people that live with you, you know, what they say and how they treat you in those times that are very patient. I mean, those are the lifesavers, in my opinion. Those are the people that you want to bring the closest around you. Steph, do you want to talk a little bit? I mean, I always like to ask people this question when they're grieving, because it's a question that I most like to be asked. What was your mother like?
She was the best. I'm going to say I cannot speak to that right now because I am not able to do. I'm not able to go down that train.
That's fine.
She was
That's totally
the
fine.
greatest woman who ever lived.
It's not the end of the
I don't have the bandwidth for that one today. And like
That's
being
totally
able to
fine.
say, I don't have the bandwidth for that is something that I had to learn.
Betsy, can you mute yourself?
Yep.
You're getting too much
Sorry.
background noise. That's okay. Sorry, Steph,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, but just like the like I'm that is it is emotionally exhausting to be present to the awesomeness of my mom, and then also knowledgeable of the fact that she's not here, and holding those two things together is frequently too overwhelming. And so I will like tap out, and I'm going to tap out on that one.
I think that's a perfect example of that moment, though, when you identify not just what you're feeling, but what you need, and then you ask her what you need. Like that's
Yes.
good boundaries. That was a very good example of excellent boundaries.
Yeah. It's better than yesterday when I'm on the phone with my aunt and we're talking, and in the middle of it I realized I was like, we're talking about a very emotional charged thing, and I was like, I can't talk about this anymore. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I was like, it's not you, I'm done. Like it's just like whew. Like I can now like feel when my body is like, we no longer have the bandwidth for this, like abort the mission, like get out. And that's which also I had to learn.
Yeah, I do. I also feel it, especially it's usually in my neck and my back. This feeling of being completely drained it gets scary. It gets really scary. And I feel like, oh, there's something else trying to control me here. It's not myself anymore. It's something or someone else trying to drag me into an emotional space that I am not going to go. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, with our words, we have to be so careful with each other, because we cannot go by our last experience or by our own experience when we talk to other people about our emotions. We are all, you know, people who've gone through a journey, and I'm sorry about the music. Something's just out of my hands today. But you know, and that's
well,
sorry.
Unfortunately, there's so much codependency in grief, and oftentimes grief will reveal a lot of codependent behavior. And so when you decide to start setting good boundaries for yourself and going, okay, I'm the one that's responsible for my own heart. No one's going to come and rescue me and make my grief easier for me. I need to start asking for what I need. I need to start asking for what I don't need, right? And as that changes, I change with it, and I adjust my ask. I adjust my expectations. I communicate those things. Oftentimes what that will feel like, though, is even though we're becoming the healthiest version of ourselves, the other people in our life, because they're not grieving, are not having this big epiphany of the ways that they are codependent and the unfair expectations that they put on others. So they will take our health, this new evolution, and turn it into either sometimes it's, oh, well, you're not thinking about me, right? This isn't just about you, right? I'm involved too. Or go into overdrive as to, how can I fix you? How can I take away these feelings? How can I just make you feel better? Right. And so sometimes we just have to put a little bit of space between us, even the people who mean well. I think oftentimes people have good intentions. They're just lacking certain skills, certain insights, or sometimes just even certain experiences, but oftentimes the healthier we get and the more we unravel codependency in our life, especially in our grief, the more, I always tell my clients, the people that benefit from our codependent behavior the most will kick back the hardest when we start setting healthy boundaries. And that will even happen in grief. People will have sort of this response to us like, whoa, okay, I didn't. And we're like, it isn't about you. I know it's like crazy for you to think that, but it actually has nothing to do with you. I'm taking responsibility for my own heart, and this is what it looks like. And no apologies, right? We move on with our lives, but that can be a very hard thing to do at a time when you are so depleted by your grief, right? Your pain is so depleting. And I think that's one of the hardest things about grief is you pretty much have to learn how to do the hardest human skills, the most difficult human skills that we learn as people. We have to learn to apply those at the time in our life when we are most depleted. So it's kind of, I just remember feeling during my grief experience that it was just an unbelievably unfair ask, right? Like now I'm having to step up in ways in my own life that are so difficult at a time when I've never been more depleted in my whole entire life.
Yeah, well, it's like not only do I have to deal with a crater in the middle of my house, now I have to build the fence around it. Like, are you kidding me? Like, there's so much, like I gotta do that. like yeah, and like my bandwidth got smaller. Like my bandwidth for bullshit.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm like now I have to be cognizant of it, and I have to self-monitor in a way that I've never had to before. And oh, by the way, I got less gas. The tank is smaller. Like it was so frustrating.
Yeah, and we're just burning through all of that emotional energy like at a rate we never have, right? It's just we're just not operating in the same way as before grief. but at the same time, it makes total sense, because if we were operating in the same way, then what the heck would we be doing, right? Like grief just, it changes everything. It really does. And learning, but also what's, and oftentimes my clients will not believe me when I tell them this. I say, but it won't always feel this way. This intensity that you feel right now is not a permanent intensity. And if you're willing to be self-aware, ask for what you need, do the right, continue taking these steps, right? Give yourself permission to even be in survival mode. Your bandwidth does get back to, and not even, I don't even want to say back to normal, because I don't even know what the heck normal is anyway, right? But you do adjust. What was so hard at the beginning of your grief turns out not to be so hard. We have these shifts, we have these changes. It does evolve, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it happens differently for everyone at different times, right? But I think sometimes, and I remember thinking that myself, I remember telling myself, I'm never going to be okay again. Like, life is never going to be okay again. Like, this is just, I just don't see how anything will ever be okay. And I'm 13 years out now going, there's actually a lot of things that are okay about my life. It doesn't mean that I still, don't have a significant loss that impacted every aspect of my life. But that overwhelming intensity is not how I function today. And we do have the capacity to learn new coping mechanisms, new skills, new ways to function, new ways to get strong, new relationships to build, new needs that we have that we can get met. Like, we do have this amazing capacity to heal. And that's like the one thing that I want people to hear, is that whatever you're feeling right now, wherever you're at, you're allowed to be there. But I promise you, if you don't want to stay here, you don't have to. Healing is possible for you if that's the direction you want to take your grief.
Right. I think that for me too, though, I mean, the way I've grieved changes, but still can pop up in ways that I cannot always identify. I'd say that like one of the greatest griefs in my life started about 8 years ago, a little over 8 years ago. And I had a conversation on the phone, not yesterday. It was a couple months ago, with someone who I've known for a long time. And after I got off the phone with her, I was frustrated about our relationship, some aspects of my relationship with her. But I realized that it was really because I missed the relationship I had with this other person who had always been there for me in a way and understood me in a way that she didn't. And so I, just burst into tears going, oh, I just am still grieving for this other person. So it feels worse. Like, this wouldn't be such a bad conversation today if I weren't also still grieving 8 years later. But, I'm still going to grieve. I'm still going to grieve. That's not going to change. But what has to change is that I think I have to breathe and be patient with myself and others yet more than I have before. And I have to give space, I have to give more time to a fewer number of people than I'm used to. And that continues to change in my life in order to be healthy myself, which is gradual. I can't do that overnight. That's not a change that I can make overnight, because too many people get hurt if I don't return their phone calls. I'm gonna return your phone call or send you a text or an email, not right away, but I'll get back to you if I remember that you've emailed me, which usually I never forget, but occasionally it happens.
So much better than me. I forget it all.
Hey, and that changes too, though. Your memory's affected. That's a big thing. The older we get, the more our memories change, and your memories get warped and weird if you don't revisit them sometimes with other people. Sometimes, my sister and I don't remember things the same at all, and we're only 2 years apart, and we weren't both there for everything that happened, but man, we will tell the same story 2 completely different ways. And that's just, I get no explanation for a lot of that stuff. But that's okay. We can make new memories. We new memories are possible. And that's, you know, one of the great things about nature. Steph, do you want to talk about the soul singing stuff? We've only got a few minutes left. I'll give them
sure,
to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have this this practice. It started as a group practice. It sort of turned into a private practice, mostly because I did opera things this summer and no longer had time. But I do taking the breathing technique of opera and integrating it into a practice anybody can do, where I'm on Zoom with you. You are on mute. And I am leading breathing things and stretching things. It's like yoga light, while doing things that sort of open up your chest, your diaphragm, your intercostal muscles, and then sort of like going down into like the lower like pelvic floor area to open everything up through singing. And it's totally free because I can't hear you. So if I'm leading you through a bunch of exercises, whether we're humming, whether we're doing chest voice or head voice or looking for resonant spaces, you are totally free to explore it all. Sitting, standing, lying on the back, we go through this whole thing. And it's meant to be therapeutic, both physically and mentally. And the whole point is that in like a 25-minute session, you will have moved through a stress cycle and have been able to sort of move out of fight or flight. And so that's, it's soul singing, and you can find it at soulsingingcommunity.com and learn more about it there, and do like, there's a YouTube video for a free 15 minutes. So that's mine, but I would also love to know about what Rachel offers.
Well, first of all, that's awesome. I don't know if part of the reason why I don't know what your motivation was for creating that, but I don't know if you know, but grief sits in your lungs. So the lungs are the system of the body that are most affected by grief. Yeah. So breathing exercises are profoundly beneficial for people who are in a season of grief. Absolutely. So, and then anger sits in your liver. So liver support is, yes, huge for if you're struggling with anger,
drinking. I'm so mad.
resentment. Anyway, we can talk more about that offline, but I just want to throw that out there. But yeah, and then what I do is it's thegriefgal.com. I also have a Facebook page called The Grief Gal. That's full of videos, insights. You know, I just talk about real stuff, and I don't get on there with like Instagram influencer makeup either. Like, we just talk about, right, what we're facing. There's a lot right now about grief during the holidays. There's practical advice, and then there's just honest truth about grieving and healing. So they're all free. You can watch them. And if you have any questions, send me a instant message, because I'm always happy to answer questions. So.
Unmute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Rachel, I really, really appreciate you being here with us. Thank you. And I know there's been people watching us all the way through today, and we hope that we could help. And let's do this again in the new year.
Thank you, Betsy.